Well, thank you, everyone. Thank you so much. Good morning. I just want to say how happy I am to be here to talk about sustainable agriculture solutions with so many pioneers who understand that sustainable agriculture is key to solving so many of our world's problems and also doing well in the marketplace. And for those of you who aren't yet on the sustainable agriculture train, I hope that I'm going to give you a lot of good reasons why you should be. Not least of which is because health and safety concerns about pesticides, antibiotics, hormones, and GMOs are driving increasing numbers of consumers, and especially moms, to choose local, organic, pasture-based products. And so there's a lot of money at stake and a lot of hearts and minds to be captured at the grocery store. But as you'll hear in my talk today, and you heard a little bit earlier, the supply of organic is not nearly keeping up with demand, and many consumers are not going to settle for imports. Can you hear me? And so there is a lot of opportunity and need to grow the organic sustainable food supply, and a role for all of us to help move that along. Now, for those of you who are already on the sustainable agriculture train and already doing really cool, innovative things on the ground, and I'm going to highlight some of those today, I just want to urge you all to get more involved in the political and policy arena, which to get the kind of public investments and policy reforms that are desperately needed to level the playing field, build greater organic and sustainable supply, and really transform the way that food is grown in this country. So I'm not going to spend too much time on the doom and gloom, but it is an inescapable reality that our world faces multiple food-related crises, from climate chaos, water scarcity, environmental degradation, widespread poverty, 800 million hungry people in the world, including in the US. And the truth is, these crises are threatening generations to come and threatening your supply chain. And the truth is that our current industrial food system, based largely on GMO monocropping, pesticides, chemicals, massive animal factory farms, highly processed food, cheap labor, are driving many of these problems. So don't believe for a minute what you may have heard, that we need this kind of agriculture to feed the world. How many of you have heard that? It's just not true. What is true is that the dominant industrial food system is in fact failing to feed the world today, and it's compromising the very natural resources that we need to feed the world tomorrow. Our global industrial food system is the largest user of land in the world. It's among the largest polluter of air, water, and soil, with hundreds of dead zones around the world, widespread pollution in rivers, lakes, and streams, declining aquifers all over the world in the US, especially in the Midwest and California. We have declining bee populations, loss of biodiversity, and the list goes on. You've all heard it, and it's all true. And the food system, as you just heard, is responsible for more than a quarter of all the greenhouse gases in the world, and it's also responsible for unprecedented levels of very costly diet-related disease. We have animal production systems in the US and around the world that are inhumane and that rely heavily on the routine use of antibiotics, which are making those drugs ineffective for humans. We also, in the US and globally, food and agriculture workers are the least paid and most food insecure of all sectors. So, if we don't change the way we grow and produce food, these problems will only get worse. So humanity's greatest challenge is clear. How are we going to adequately feed everyone while protecting the soil, water, and other resources that we need to feed the world now and in the future? So the very good news is that we already have the answer. So many scientists and policymakers, including some very smart people at the United Nations who have been looking at the most environmentally sustainable way to feed our growing population, have determined that agroecology, including policies that support small-scale growers and diversified organic systems, is the most effective solution to both world hunger and climate change. So agroecology, which includes diversified organic agriculture, not large monocropping organic agriculture, is a holistic approach to farming that uses ecological practices like cover cropping, composting, crop rotations, and biological control of insects to create truly sustainable, diversified, and highly productive food and farming systems. So millions of farmers around the world are embracing these practices, which increase soil fertility and manage insects without the need for toxic chemicals. And they do this all while reducing greenhouse gas emissions and building more resiliency in our food and farming systems. So the need, and also, importantly, they provide better incomes for farmers and better economic opportunity for communities. Organic farmers don't have to rely on costly inputs, and they also tend to hire workers all year round, which is very good for rural communities. And they create nutritious and produce nutritious food. So the need to make the shift to sustainable agriculture is nothing short of urgent. Environmental damage tied to industrial agriculture is estimated at around $3 trillion annually, according to a new UN Food and Agriculture report. And that same report found that organic and agroecological methods, such as holistic grazing and organic wheat production, greatly diminish these costs and provide a path forward that effectively both sustains humans and the planet. So it's often said that organic and sustainable agriculture costs too much. How many of you have heard that? But the research shows that the opposite is true. It's industrialized agriculture that's costing too much, both in terms of our health and the environment. So the hard part is overcoming the status quo and the deep-rooted resistance to change from those who are benefiting from the status quo. And so that's where all of you come in. It all really boils down to one simple fact, which is for those of you that are still buying most of your food or ingredients from industrial food suppliers without asking them to improve their practices, or if you simply don't have traceability and don't even know where your ingredients or your products are coming from, you are still a bigger part of the problem than you are the solution. So I'd like to explain now more about how agriculture, and in particular agroecology and diversified organic agriculture, actually solve some of these problems and hopefully inspire you to do more to support these practices. So despite what you may have heard in the mainstream media, a growing body of research shows that organic and diversified organic and agroecological systems can produce yields equal or close to that of industrial agriculture, and more than enough to feed our growing population. And that is especially true during times of drought and other major weather disruptions. So I want to highlight just two studies, though there are many, many more. One is a 2014 UC Berkeley meta-study that looked at more than 100 studies that found that there was no yield crop for some crops, and that the gap for other crops was much smaller than previously thought. And then there's research from the USDA that found that organic grain production can match or exceed U.S. industrial grain yields, while providing equal or even higher profits for farmers. But most importantly, organic farms can produce great yields, but also great benefits. So they deliver numerous ecological and public health benefits: healthier soil, cleaner, more abundant water, increased biodiversity, pollinator habitat, fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and also they reduce harmful chemical exposures for both farm workers and consumers, especially kids that are susceptible to pesticide residues. So let's just look for a minute at how organic practices like cover cropping, mulching, improved management of pastures and rangeland don't just pull carbon out of the atmosphere, which is so great for climate change, but they also help store water, which is critical in both times of drought and floods. So this happens because when you increase soil organic matter, which all of these practices do, you also improve water capture, infiltration, and storage. So research has found that increasing soil organic matter by just 1% can enhance the storage, water storage in the soil by 16,000 gallons per acre foot. Now that's a lot of water. So the soil becomes a sponge. And so because of this, key studies, including one from the Rodale Institute, found that during times of drought, the organic farms can produce higher yields than their conventional counterparts, 30% higher yields in some cases. So these are studies. What about the real world? Well, I want to tell you a story about two fourth-generation farmers from northeastern Iowa who run a 385-acre farm growing corn, soy, hay, small grains, and hogs and cattle. And they do this, they farm without any of the chemical herbicides, insecticides, and fertilizers that so many of their neighbors use. So I asked Tom recently, how is he able to farm so successfully without all the chemicals? And especially, how is he able to manage all the weeds that are plaguing so many of his neighbors because of the increased spraying of glyphosate and the resistance that's breeding? So Tom told me that his secret to success lies in the integrated approach to farming both crops and animals on the farm, and to using cover crops and crop rotations and animals to keep the weeds at bay and also build the soil health. So besides nourishing the soil with their manure, Franson's hogs and Angus cows will happily eat weeds on the farm, converting what is a problem for most farmers into cheap nutritional food for the animals. It's brilliant. But unfortunately, most of the Midwest doesn't look like the Franson farm. It looks like this. And most food animals in this country are raised in places that look like this, where too much manure is actually a problem, pollutant, rather than a nutrient for the soil. And many companies that want to source organic, grass-fed, or more sustainable meat can't find it, or can't find it at the price that they want. So we're seeing companies, sadly, like Chipotle and Panera's and Carl's Jr. import their grass-fed meat and other meat from overseas. And this is such a huge missed opportunity for building a local healthy livestock system here in the US. And as many of you know, the consumer demand for organic food and sustainable meat is surging, but domestic production has not kept up. So we're especially seeing shortages of grain and animal feed, as well as sustainably produced meat and poultry. So this is a big problem, but also a really big opportunity. Now, the fact that production hasn't kept up with demand means that organic cropland pasture in the US is still a tiny fraction of our nation's farm landscape. In fact, less than 1%, 0.4% of our agricultural land right now is in organic production. And as we heard earlier, we represent about 50% of the organic market, just 7% of the production. That's a problem, and it's an opportunity. So why? Why is it that we have we don't have enough supply or enough farmers to supply the growing demand for organic food and sustainable meat. Well, there's a lot of issues at play here, including high labor costs and a broken immigration system. But there is one big reason that I want to talk about, and that is U.S. government policy, or food policy, or the Farm Bill, which is the legislation that determines where taxpayer dollars go with respect to the food system. So when I want to understand a problem in the world, I always say, follow the money. Where does that tell us? So let's look at the money in the Farm Bill. So over the past several years, our government has spent just $65 million, and I should say, for those of you who pay taxes in the U.S., that's our money. We've just spent $65 million per year on average to support organic agriculture, $138 million for local food systems and beginning farmers and supporting local and regional infrastructure for building local food systems, compared to $11 billion a year, and it's actually much higher now, to subsidize chemical-intensive industrial commodity production, with very few conservation strings attached. So it's no wonder that we have a glut of unsustainable corn and a dearth of sustainable meat, organic grain. So as you can see, there is a huge mismatch between what consumers want, what your supply chains need, and what U.S. policy does. So to wrap up, oh my gosh, okay. So to wrap up, I just want to spend the next few minutes talking about how each and every one of you has a role to play in expanding the supply of organic and sustainable food production here in the U.S. First, we need everyone to commit to investing more time and money in policy change. There is no other way to create the supply chain that you need in order to meet growing demand in the marketplace. If we don't change policy, it's not going to change much. Number two, even if you do step up and do more in the policy realm, we're going to need to see a lot more. Companies are going to have to fill the gaps left by policy in the short run and invest more in organic transition and conservation practices. And I know many of your companies are already doing this. I'm going to highlight a few examples. And third, you can partner with and support organizations that are doing the hard work and working to change policies in Washington, which I know also some of you already do. So let's look at policy for a minute. Getting a major shift, as I just mentioned, in policy will require a massive lobbying effort by the organic and sustainable foods industry. And that's each and every one of you. So while there is currently some lobbying going on by organic companies through the Organic Trade Association, it's very small. And as this Politico article from June pointed out, and I'll quote, there is virtually no good food industry lobbying strategy in place, as the vanguards of healthier eating have largely ignored Capitol Hill, leaving the traditional food and beverage powerhouses, which spent more than $36 million last year on lobbying, to push their agenda. So this needs to change. And I just want to highlight a couple of key priorities that I think we all need to focus on, both in the 2018 Farm Bill, which is ways away, and also annual budget priorities. So we need to protect and expand organic research and extension programs. We need to create incentives and more support for sustainable livestock. We also need to protect and expand conservation programs, which get cut year after year. We need more support for beginning farmers. And we need to reform crop insurance. That's the $10 billion price tag. And make sure that all subsidies are actually tied to better environmental performance. Now, this will make the conventional supply chain much more sustainable if we can do that. So, and then beyond the Farm Bill, we also need better regulation of industrial agriculture. There's to address all of those externalized impacts that I was talking about. And there's so much to say about that, but I just want to highlight one priority that is really near and dear to my heart. We do a lot of work on it, which is getting the routine use of antibiotics out of our livestock systems. And the market is moving way faster than policy on this, and I thank all of you if you've been part of moving that issue. And then finally, we need stronger USDA organic standards, particularly around animal welfare in the US, in our organic standards. So, in addition to working for long-term policy change, there are steps that you all can take right now to improve practices on the ground and lay the groundwork for a more sustainable supply chain. And I want to highlight one really great example of a collaboration that that's recently set up, and we need a lot more of. It's the U.S. Organic Grain Collaborative, and this is a pre-competitive initiative that's focused on increasing domestic grain supply, improving productivity and profitability of organic grain producers, farmers, through research, better market information, technical assistance. This is a very exciting initiative supported by the OTA and the Sustainable Food Lab, with leadership from Annie's and Organic Valley, Cliff Bar, Nature's Path, and others. And I would love to see a similar initiative like this for sustainable livestock, organic and sustainable meat production. We really need that. So supporting new farmers, programs that help new farmers is also vital. The Organic Farming Research Foundation estimated that we need about 30,000 new organic farmers to meet our demand in the U.S. So Stonyfield Farm is doing its part by supporting a organic dairy farmer training program that aims to increase production of organic milk and grow new dairy farmers in the Northeast. Nature's Path, Annie's, and several other companies have been supporting a really innovative program in Montana to support new farmers help them learn about organic dryland farming systems. But it's not just about supporting new farmers. It's also about working with conventional farmers who already have the know-how, the land, the equipment, the financing connections, and we need to encourage those farmers to transition to organic or transition to better practices by paying higher premiums during transition and also providing other support. So I just want to quickly highlight an initiative from the Organic Trade Association. They are working right now to get an official transition program established at the USDA that would be verified so that there is a way to support farmers that are in transition in the marketplace. And then for those of you who primarily work with conventional growers, there is also so much more that can be done to move the sustainability needle along the supply chain. So you could give preference, for example, to growers who are implementing better water management, nutrient management, pesticide management, soil management practices. You could prohibit the use of the worst pesticides in your supply chain, similar to what Whole Foods is doing in its responsible purchasing program, which I think you're going to hear about in a minute. But first you need to know more about what those practices are on the ground. If you don't know, first you have to ask. So transparency and traceability is really important. And finally, just to reiterate what we just heard, I want to encourage companies also to think about investing more in plant-based proteins. Because in order to feed a growing population and sustain the planet, sustainable agriculture solutions require that we all people, especially in developing countries, eat more plants and less meat and dairy. So to wrap up, we need more farmers like Tom Franzen and more companies like Nature's Path and Stonyfield, Annie's, Amy's Kitchen, and others that recognize that the future of the planet and their own success as a company require long-term strategies and policy reform to get the supply that we need and in the U.S. We need to advocate for more government support, and we need stronger, not weaker, organic standards, especially in terms of animal welfare. And it's really important to know that consumers are getting more savvy. They're not going to accept greenwashing, so we need to make real change on the ground. And I just want to invite you all to partner with organizations like mine, like Friends of the Earth. We'd love to work with any of you on advancing some of these policy solutions on the ground. And one thing that I'd really like to see get going in the next year is another similar thing to the grain initiative, a pre-competitive working group to build the supply and the policy change for sustainable meat and livestock production. And also to let you know that we're planning to put out a report in March that highlights a lot of the benefits of agroecology and organic farming, and would love to share that with you all when it's ready. So please visit our website, and you can follow us on Twitter. And to really wrap up, I just want to say, we are at a critical juncture in our world, both in terms of how we sustain our planet and how we feed the world and feed our families healthy food. And you all here have a lot of power and a lot of responsibility, and the choices you make and the leadership you show will really have major ripples along the supply chain, on the ground, in terms of our farming landscapes, and also in the halls of power if you choose to go there. And I hope you will.